Can you hear me? Testing. Jake Porter. Don't remember. I think I had some bananas and yogurt.
Marco Battaglia. I had some almond butter and some toast, and yeah, excited to be here today.
All right, so this thing is set to go live. Volume.
I'm Cathy Glasson, opinion editor for the Des Moines Register, and we are here for an interview with Jake Porter and Marco Battaglia. This is Jake, and here's Marco. The two candidates for the Libertarian nomination for governor. The winner of the June 5th primary will face Republican Governor Kim Reynolds in November, as well as the winner of the Democratic primary. The Libertarian Party qualified to be a major state party, official state party, during the 2016 election. Gentlemen, welcome to the Register.
Thanks for having us.
In the room with us are Register editors and reporters. Let's go around the room. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, Carol Hunter, executive editor.
Rachel Stassenberger, politics editor.
David Shivers, president.
All right. Who wants to start?
No problem, either way.
Okay.
I can go.
All right, Marco, tell us about yourself and what you think qualifies you to be governor of Iowa.
Sure. I was born, raised, and educated in Des Moines. Went to Woodlawn Elementary, Meredith Middle School, Herbert Hoover High School, University of Northern Iowa as a media major. I've worked on local, state, and national political campaigns for going on over a decade now. And I have political allies all over the state. That's the reason I got ballot access when some other people from, parties with longer histories did not. So we've met some of those challenges already that have faced us, and I knew through my experience in the media, I kind of knew we had what it takes to get our platform and our message heard. I also I'm on a level with the majority of Iowans in terms of tax bracket, in terms of I'm just getting done paying off my student loans. So I know what it's like being a recent college graduate, having acreage on the south side of Des Moines. Been going around the whole state, meeting with union leadership, law enforcement, and really just listening, but also making sure they could be on the same page with my platform. And I think really getting someone like me in there, we can really push solutions with everyone that's elected to office. Doesn't matter, party affiliation or, if there's baggage with scandals or anything, sexual harassment. I think we can be a new voice, new leadership that really has zero tolerance for that kind of nonsense.
Okay, and Jake, same question to you. Just tell us about yourself, tell us what makes you qualified to be governor of Iowa.
Absolutely. So I've been involved in politics now since I was 16 years old, been involved in the Libertarian Party for that long, so I can remember back when a time that you mentioned the word libertarian, people thought, librarians, the librarians have a party now, vegetarians, they had all kinds of confusing ideas. And so it's pretty exciting to be here today, and I think I've helped build this organization. I have a lot of experience in managing campaigns, managing businesses. I'm a business consultant over in Council Bluffs. I worked for companies like Yahoo and Apple, and was a retail store manager before I started doing a lot of this work. So I've had to deal with these issues, whether it be sexual harassment, firing people, the terminations when people acted improperly. I've had to do that. I've managed organizations, campaigns with 200 plus volunteers. So I've got a lot of experience doing that type of stuff that does relate to the governor's office, as we're finding out in a lot of these personnel issues. I've also ran for Secretary of State a couple times. Back in 2010 and 2014 I ran. And during that time, it was the 2014 campaign that I worked with the Democrats and Republicans, but mostly the Iowa Senate Democrats, in getting a major voter registration issue fixed. The problem was that when people were registering with the party of their choice, it was coming back no party, or sometimes doing very odd things. Now, it wasn't intentional on any of their parts, but there was certainly an error there, in that no one wanted to admit in the Secretary of State's office. So we were able to work with the Iowa Senate Democrats and get that fixed, and that helped thousands of Iowans register with the party of their choice. I think I've got a clear understanding of what is needed right now, and I can also talk about a lot of issues that are often ignored, whether it be criminal justice reform, for one, that's often ignored, whether it be substance abuse, how to solve that. Should we really be putting people in prison for victimless crimes, or should we be treating the addiction? So there's a lot of issues that I'll focus on, and I think Fred Hubbell's starting to take some of those issues I talk about, like restoring voting rights for the 25,000 Iowans that have served their time and paid for their crimes.
I'd like to have this work as a little, we're not really debating here, let's have a conversation. So you guys, if you want to comment on something that the other one is saying, feel free to do that. We may break in at some point, ask some questions, but I wanted to just start off, for people who are not, you segued very well into this, Jake, by saying not everybody knows what a libertarian is. So why don't you start, just explain what it is about libertarians that are different from the other major parties that people may be more familiar with, and how that fits with your own philosophy.
Yeah, I often say, libertarians believe that you should be free to live your life as you see fit, so long as you're not harming anyone else. I often say we take the good from the Democrats and Republicans and we toss out the bad. Democrats tend to believe in more personal freedoms, not as many economic freedoms. Republicans tend to believe in more economic freedoms, but fewer personal freedoms, and we believe in maximum personal and economic freedoms. So we run to the center on many issues. It's somewhere I think would be a common sense approach that many Iowans are looking for.
Okay. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say what brought me to the party, as opposed to being a young Iowan that kind of had opportunities in the other political parties as well, was really just this core belief of nonviolence, whether it's communication or action, that we can get things done peacefully without, someone showing up with a gun to your house to enforce some controversial law, whether it's a puddle on a farm, or a plant that someone has that they're using as medicine. Really, just across the board. I think that these ideas do appeal to a lot of Iowans. Especially, we see those signs, stop eminent domain abuse, all over. I just think that, it's the bottom line is peaceful means to get things done politically.
To carry this a little bit further, what are some ideas, for example, from the Republican and Democratic Party that you just reject? What are some of those things that really specifically set you apart from being a Republican or a Democrat?
We definitely reject this idea that we need to ramp up the war on drugs, even in regards to something like opioids. We don't think that making it harder to get or stronger penalties are the solutions that are going to help the most Iowans. We actually think that'll exacerbate the problems. So war on drugs is a big one that separates us from both parties, but even more so, I think, Republicans in Iowa. And then from the other side, I would say we were big on reducing the tax burden for all Iowans, not just a particular segment. And we have a history in Iowa of kind of going back and forth between reducing specific taxes, and then in the next cycle you get more taxes across the board, property sales, income tax increases. So the idea that we want to phase out that kind of burden really separates us more from the Democrats, but also from the Republicans at this point too.
And I think a big one is corporate welfare. You know, if you listen to the Democrats debate or when Kim Reynolds talks, there's talk of a lot of corporate welfare, corporate handouts. And both parties pretty much support corporate welfare. That's the way it's been quite a few years. Now, the Democrats may say that it goes too far, or the Republicans may at times say that it goes too far, not now. But that's one that they've both have given handouts to large corporations, and they've fitted the tax bill with some of the poorest Iowans and the poorest companies. Poorest companies aren't outwriting the laws, but the big companies can get an advantage that way over the smaller business. It also, when you look at it too, creates an uneven playing field, that we're going to favor one business over the other, one industry over the other. And quite frankly, I don't think politicians are smart enough to do that. They haven't had a very good track record when it comes to picking winners and losers in the marketplace. So I think that's also a big issue that kind of separates us. And we do run a pretty clean campaign here. I mean, I can't say a bad word about Marco. And we were able to work together to do a lot of this stuff. We do travel the state frequently together, in forums, talking to people. So I think we live by the libertarian philosophy as well. We don't hurt people, we don't take their things.
Yeah, the main thing we set out to do is to give Iowans two more platforms to choose from. And there are some big differences in our platforms, but we don't feel a need to kind of go at each other to get those across.
Where would you say the limits are of that philosophy? The point where you say, okay, these are things that the government has to do because people either can't do them for themselves or they can't do them in a way that doesn't hurt other people. Jake?
Well, at some point, you can look at anything where it be, well, I'll give some clear examples. The government's here to protect people, obviously. So you shouldn't be allowed to abuse children, for example. You shouldn't be allowed to rape, murder, rob, steal, do anything that causes harm to your neighbors. And that can go into a little bit of other things like property rights, which I'm sure we'll get into more about pollution, for example. That's a big topic that's coming up. Well, you have a right to run a business as you see fit, and you have a right to use your land as you see fit, but you don't have a right to cause harm to your neighbors. You don't have a right to pollute their land, make it difficult for them. You don't have a right to destroy all their clean drinking water. So most of it comes down to property rights, but you don't have a right to hurt other people, and that's what we have the government for, is to protect those property rights of everyone.
Anything else?
Yeah, I would say we kind of get set back in a number of areas by kind of trying to regulate so much and step in. For example, things like we've been improving on responses to people that are going through mental health issues, and by reducing kind of nonviolent crimes, I think we can continue to get first responders and police better suited to handle a mental health crisis that they're approaching. Same with things like human trafficking. There are some problems there with the way we currently enforce, say we're protecting people. A common thing that's been going on lately is traffickers will pin drugs and on their actual victims and then move on, down 80-35, and then the victim gets charged with, say, prostitution. So I think by really focusing on what are the things we're doing to protect people, that there's kind of a lot of things across the board. Same with, I would even say the nitrate issue fits in here, because I think I personally, this is where probably all candidates differ, but I think we need the nutrient reduction strategy as a way to protect Iowans that are, just want to have recreational activity in the water, that don't want higher water bills, that want to maybe have a different kind of farm business than their neighbors and the people upstream. And we can't deny, what happens if it gets down to the dead zone. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways by having these conversations we can actually kind of show the way we do think there should be protections for the individual, for citizens. Same with what is going on with MCOs and Medicaid. I think that I actually have a gentleman on my team that had a life-saving medicine he was denied because of the changes kind of happening haphazardly. And that's something we're going around the state trying to convey, is that we know it's not going to be this movement to tomorrow we have a free market. We don't want to leave people behind that are actually vulnerable, that maybe have a family member that has a handicap or that can't take care of themselves for any reason. So it's not this wild, we're working against the stereotype of Wild West is coming back tomorrow. We think we can actually move away from crony markets and crony capitalism to freer medicine, freer ability to choose what people put in their own body without leaving people behind or harming more people.
Could you drill down a little bit on, you both mentioned environmental regulations, you mentioned stereotypes. The stereotype of Democrats is that they want to regulate everything, and of Republicans they want to regulate nothing. And I actually hear you both sort of saying that some environmental regulations are good, which is against the libertarian stereotype. Talk a little bit about how that would play out in Iowa.
Well, it's against the stereotype, and that's part of educating people on what it means to be a libertarian, of course, because people get the idea that we're just extreme Republicans on that issue, which is not the case, because what we can kind of see what's happening when the government has got involved, they've allowed big corporations, that's who's doing the bulk of this polluting, to basically do whatever they've wanted to the land, and then we see the complications that come with that impact all of Iowans. And so that goes more to, now, I don't necessarily think that the state of Iowa, the state legislature, the governor's office is the best place to make all these changes at. I think the local communities are probably a lot better equipped to say, you know what, we don't want this in our community. And that's where a lot of it can stop. Because what's happening in the legislature is you flip back and forth between Democrats and Republicans every few years. The Democrats will do one thing, the Republicans will reverse it, and it goes back and forth, and nothing ever really gets done. But yeah, I do think that local control is one thing. We talk about whether it be this, whether it be minimum wage or whatever else. I think they have a little bit more political role in deciding what's going to work. Our markets are very different. Our needs are very different between rural and urban Iowa. What might work in Red Oak may not work here in Des Moines. So I think a lot of more local control, but you don't have the right to pollute your neighbor's property or land.
Yeah, I think that innovation is going to do wonders for the water, soil, pollinators. And yeah, all kind of you join a party, there's going to be these stereotypes that you work against. And we admit that those exist for Democrats and Republicans as well. Not everyone running kind of meets the kind of what the other side thinks they are and that kind of thing. But in terms of like eminent domain abuse typically comes into play when we're talking about environmental issues. I've actually supported the Cleverleys and the Tweedies in Lee County and Jasper County when making. I think there's a reason that we have eminent domain, but I think it needs to be a lot harder for the government to use, and there needs to be a much better process to ensure it's fair as opposed to this board that is either some type of nepotism or some type of people with shared business interests deciding, is this a fair use of eminent domain?
Well, what is a fair use of eminent domain?
That, to me, if there's something that someone believes is going to benefit an individual, or an individual representing a company believes this is going to benefit a majority of people in a specific area or a state, or even it could be down to a community, then you appeal that they should be able to use this land, use this property. And I think going all the way back to the major Supreme Court decisions, it's been heavily in favor of state power over the actual individual, and I think we can move a lot further to make it harder to use, and that's not just going to be a state or gubernatorial thing, but hopefully that'll happen, nationwide, federally as well.
Some people say eminent domain should be reserved for public projects and never for-profit projects. Is that the right mix, or are there some for-profit projects that are worthy of consideration because they might benefit people generally?
In the 90s, there was the case of Vera Cooking, I believe is her name, over in New York, where Donald Trump said that he called her house an eyesore and wanted to take this woman living on Social Security, wanted to take her home away from her so he could build a parking lot for one of his casinos. Is that really a fair use? Should you really bully the city council into taking an elderly woman's house away from her? We see a lot of that. Or should we, when it comes to like the pipeline, you can tell there's cronyism going here whenever, Branstad's, I think his chief of staff that he had leaves to go work for the pipeline company. Things like that happen, you wonder, okay, Branstad's appointing the board that's going to the utilities board that's going to grant this ability. He's handpicking the members, and then some of his campaign people or political people go and work for the pipeline company. That's just a little bit suspicious to me. So what you see a lot of times happen is the state says, we've got they've already got these really entangling alliances with these big businesses, whether it be Apple, whether it be the millions in tax breaks or the handouts that they give them. And they also give a lot of political money, PACs and such. And then later on, when they ask for things like eminent domain, well, of course, politicians have already been bribed, and you end up seeing things that are very dangerous. I think we want to keep the government out of doing that, out of picking winners and losers in the marketplace, out of taking someone's property, my property, that may not make me a whole lot of money, but it could make someone else more money. I think we want to keep that's a very dangerous road to go down, that you end up with a government that's really for the corporations at that point and not for the people.
Before we get too far, go ahead.
I would just add to kind of shift that over to another big issue in terms of subsidies that prop up monoculture and large fields and fields of one crop supported over another. I think this is where a lot of fertilizer runoff comes from, and I definitely propose the idea that if we moved away from picking and choosing a specific crop, we could actually compete better with more varied fruits and vegetables. I mean, I'm sure both of us want to move like hemp freedom, get that move through the legislature, get it to our desk as fast as possible. I think the people of Iowa want that. And that can be used as a cover crop. It'll give people, and even a cash crop, it'll give people alternatives to letting all the nitrates run off into the water. If we really kind of allow for more innovation and competition in farming, I think we can lead the way again for another 100 years, but we're going to do that with more varied fruits and vegetables, more cold winter crops, more perennials and grasses, prairie restoration, things like that, as opposed to fields and fields of a subsidized crop.
You've mentioned the nutrient reduction strategy a couple of times, and now that's a voluntary program, and which would seem to fit with the libertarian philosophy. On the other hand, Democrats would say that under this voluntary philosophy, you've still had harm to others. Would that be a case where if you see that continuing, that you would say there needs to be regulation?
I don't want to speak for Jake, but I think this might be an area where we may actually have differences in our platform. So I don't know if you want to address that or.
Well, yeah, I do think that at some point, if you're polluting and you keep doing it, that there has to be some sort of consequence to doing that, or you have to change your ways. Because, like I say, you don't have the right to hurt other people's property. I think we all benefit from clean drinking water, obviously. We all benefit from clean air. We don't want to have those problems. And that's something that hurts all of Iowans and even hurts us economically, in the future. Maybe not right now, it's not harming us so much. Give it 10, 20, 30, 50 years and see what happens if we allow that to occur. So you don't have the right to pollute.
In addition to that, I think we may need to do more instead of not a voluntary effort, an actual nutrient reduction strategy, and help, say we're gonna spend money to help farmers do this. And I think the way that we do that is by showing, where the real costs are. I don't know how many meetings, I lost count of the number of meetings I went to with Bill Stowe from Waterworks, the number of meetings I've been to with individual Iowans who have been working on the nutrient reduction strategy for, a decade of their life now or more. And I really support what ISU is doing. That's great research with the Tallgrass Prairie Center. It's doing it at my alma mater, University of Northern Iowa. And I think someone, getting one of us in there in office, we could work with Democrats and Republicans, even if it comes down to, dropping the philosophy, dropping the isms, and just showing what's going to be better for Iowa in this sense. If companies and huge farms and people that own a lot of land are not building the costs of these water bills that everyone that has city public water have to pay, not factoring the costs of what's happening downstream to someone else's farm, someone else's property, people that have recreational businesses that aren't able to make money out on the lakes, or people that go fishing. To me, it's not so much a state versus the farmer issue as it is neighbor versus neighbor. And I think we do also need to reform not just criminal justice but civil justice, because if a person can't have an individual landowner versus another landowner can't have a say, can't have a fight to say that you've harmed my business, you've harmed my property, something is really broken with the justice system. Because I think these sort of things would be best handled in local courts, but right now people are saying they're getting no justice through that avenue.
We're going to get into some of these issues in more detail, but I wanted to just take a step back and have each of you talk about what would be your top priority if you did get elected. Jake.
Okay. So the first thing, day one, I would sign an executive order restoring the voting rights to anyone that has served their time and paid their crime. It used to be that way in Iowa, and right now it's still possible, I guess, maybe if you're lucky enough, if you go through all the hoops and procedures, maybe the governor, appeal to the governor, maybe after a while, they move pretty slow, they'll sign off on it. I've actually known one person that's got that done. It's so difficult, I don't know how many people right now, it took him years to get 50 people gone through that process. There's 25,000 or so Iowans. A lot of them can't vote right now.
And a lot of them support either people that want this or people like us. So that's another thing we're facing, is people that are actually harmed by this, can't vote.
So that's the number one priority. And then we've got this budget crisis too, right? That continues to happen over and over again. First thing I would do would be to go through, and I know the editorial board has talked a lot about also looking through the government boards and agencies, the 300 or so of them that we have here in Iowa. They've grown throughout the years, and they might be a pet project here. Maybe they served a purpose, and some of them probably still do serve purposes. We know that. Some of them can be consolidated. Some of them are not that efficient. They can't find people to serve on a lot of these boards and commissions right now. Take a look at them and make a recommendations for which one we're going to consolidate, which ones we're going to eliminate. Also take a look at business licensing and regulation, and try to explain to the legislature and try to use the bully pulpit to get some of these taken off the books. Make it easier, like the hair braiding came up a few years ago. Should you have to have a license to braid hair, for example? There's a lot of stuff like that that's on the books that we can look at and take care of. That's part of a larger thing, but it does directly impact the budget. We can also look for things that we can cut that are unnecessary. And then let's look at getting rid of all these tax credits. That's what's causing a bulk of our problems right now, is like the research activities tax credit, for example. Let's go ahead and let's stop giving these handouts to big businesses. This is costing our state a lot of money. We've got problems right now where the states are driving up costs for the local governments. I want that to, like the backfill things on the property taxes, right? The state's going to backfill this, and then, you know what, we don't have the money. Rural Iowa is, the last census, 70 out of 99 counties lose population. Let's hit rural Iowa again. Let's make them pay. Let's make them pay more. Let's make them pay more to transport people to mental health facilities. Let's make changes to the unions, people that have already negotiated these contracts down in rural Iowa, now going to Minnesota, things like that.
And Marco, what would be your top priority? If you know?
Well, one of the things that got me into the race was getting money out of politics. We agreed to do that with our primary. We've led by example. I think even a lot of, well, at least how I do it individually is I only take donations from Iowans I've talked to on the trail. I only take in-state donations. It really bothered me to see, you know, all kind of a trend throughout the country of plutocrat versus plutocrat, and not all, you know, plutocrats are a bad thing, but I don't know that that's the trend we want to continue seeing in our races for governor. I think that if you have that kind of funds to throw behind a campaign, there's so many things you could do voluntarily in the market versus spending it on TV ads or you know, what have you.
So, what, public financing, or how do you get money out of politics?
That's kind of across the board. I think how we're doing it is leading by example and showing people you don't have to vote for someone that is taking all of this money from specific lobbyists, specific companies out of state. I mean, we haven't done fundraisers out of state and things of that nature, but it's not just going to be a state or a gubernatorial thing. Like, I personally am really against like something like Citizens United, and I think more and more Republicans are seeing the negatives of something like that. But that's not necessarily something a governor could fix. So I think leading by example is a big way we've started this conversation.
Full disclaimer, I have taken money out of state. I'm going to continue to take money out of state. I don't have Fred Hubbell's money, for example. I can't put $2 million in TV ads. But when, you know, if you look at even the American Revolution, we won that by taking money from Spain and France, right? I have no problem if some libertarian in Massachusetts wants to give me money, for example, to help out the cause. I have no issue with that.
I will add that wasn't a slight against
No,
you.
no,
I was thinking specifically of these conflicts of interest. Of
right.
Look what a Democrat or Republican might be taking from a big agricultural company, a big meat company. What interests are they putting in someone's ear? So I definitely think individuals donating from out of state is not a major concern. I just did that mainly to point out, you know, look across the board at who's taken what here and how might that play into their policy, what they can get accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, or, you know, the next 50 years.
But PACs generally don't give the libertarians money. You know, it's a rare occasion they will, but it's pretty rare. I've never gotten any PAC money. I'd welcome it if someone wants to send, you know, some really quick, but no, it's not something I think really comes up that much. And the thing is, politicians and businesses, they're always going to find ways to keep money back in politics. It's something that gets talked about a lot. That's not the campaign issue I really want to address in this campaign, because I don't think it's going to happen. You know, you see we'll just limit how much an individual can contribute. Well, the wealthiest candidate, the candidates with the most name recognition, then start to win, because they can pump in as much of their own money as they want. So that really would put a disadvantage at somebody like us. We get into public financing, and then you've got the questions, well, do you really want the state funding something like the Nazi Party? These questions come up. I mean, do we want that to happen? I don't think that's the role of government either.
To jump back into what I think, what I want to accomplish, what I'm focusing on, another thing has been getting, you know, we earned this major party status over all these cycles since 1971, and making sure we are in the debates, available to the media, in the polls is one of the last big obstacles for our candidates. To me, if you're not polling a Secretary of State recognized candidate, that is not a scientific poll. That shouldn't be used for something like debate access. If you don't show who's on the ballot, who earned this spot, there's like this concern that just anybody is going to get on the ballot, but it's not easy. I don't think that's a genuine fear, at least not under a political party of any kind, be it even the next up and coming parties like the Green Party or you know, Federalist Party, whatever. But And I also have championed mental health my whole campaign. I was really happy to see the Register start off with a mental health forum and that they included all of the candidates. I mean, that was huge. It was, to me, historical. I appreciate that so much. I've worked with a place in Des Moines called Passageway, and I've championed the clubhouse model of mental health care. And I think something like this in every community or every couple of counties could fill some of the gaps that people are falling through in the ways we currently handle mental health.
Say that again, the what model?
The clubhouse model.
Clubhouse model, what is that?
That is a model where an individual that's having a mental health issue can show up at the clubhouse anytime. You don't get turned away, even if you're having trouble with your insurance. And you're welcome back, and you can be there in the middle of a breakdown, because the people that work there have been there. They know how to handle this kind of thing, and they'll do things like help you get back into a job, if that means make sure you know how to interview and have a resume, how to clean up, how to care for yourself if it's gone that far.
Are there other states that are using that model?
Yes.
Where is
The clubhouse model exists kind of across the country, but I don't believe there's any states that make it easy to fund this model. They get some state funding now, but they really have to kind of do some mathematics to get funded under the way that Iowa currently funds mental health. And I definitely want to change that, but I also believe that it's a public safety issue that we do need to restore and expand mental health access. That's an area where even from my party, there's a reason to spend money here. There's a reason to invest in this.
Well, while we're talking about money, the legislature just passed what could be a $2.2 billion tax cut if state revenues keep pace in the outer years. Marcos, why don't you start? What do you think about that tax cut? What would you have done differently, if anything?
Yeah, to real quick finish up that last,
sure.
I want to that's okay. I want to champion hemp and cannabis freedom in this cycle. That's another reason I'm running. I know people that have been dying and suffering without this access, and I know if we foster kind of a crony capitalist market, we're going to see some of the same problems in hemp and cannabis crops that we see in corn monoculture. But also another thing I want to champion is phasing out the income tax entirely in Iowa across the board for all citizens and simplifying the tax code. I actually share some of those ideas with Ron Corbett, who is running, and I met with him a couple weeks ago. I've also have an open invitation to Ross Wilburn on the other side. So I'm really trying to make sure that these ideas can work with Democrats and Republicans. And I want to phase out the income tax, and how I think we can do that and address these challenges that we've been debating throughout the whole campaign is through the markets we're opening up for things we used to prohibit, like hemp and cannabis, by allowing for occupational licensing reform and ending certificates of need. We just set a great example with Laura Ebke, a senator from Nebraska that's libertarian, kind of showing what we can do. She got this through, I think there was one vote against it. So it's one of the few times in history we had kind of a tri-party effort to get something done, and that came from having one libertarian senator in Nebraska. But yeah, phasing out the income tax entirely and also simplifying the tax code. It's absurd to me that we're not that far off from what the federal tax code is, especially in terms of income tax.
If you phase out the income tax entirely, does that mean that more of the tax burden falls on sales tax and property taxes? Property taxes being much less popular than the income tax. Sales tax, on the other hand, being a lot of times considered to be regressive.
Yeah, we want to prove, and this is an area where we are separate individuals too, so I want to point that out. I know sometimes candidates get interviewed separately, so when something like that comes up, I want to point out that there are even differences in our platform that people can go and read on our websites and things of that nature. But I think that, and a good example is New Hampshire, where they have what is widely touted as top-notch education, medical services, low cost and high quality compared to the rest of the United States at least, yet no income tax, majority excise taxes on specific goods and services. And also they're rated as having low regressiveness, and they do that because it's specific excise and taxes, so specific goods and specific services. You can avoid things that people need to survive, that the average low-income person is spending money on a regular basis.
Okay. All right. Same question to you about the income tax bill that was passed.
Yeah,
he said you have a difference. What's the difference?
I'll kind of get into that. I'll address the question first, though. My first point is going to be that, okay, so we get these, they can't even balance the budget we've got now, and so they're talking about cutting revenues. They can't pay your tax refunds on time, and they want to cut revenues. What kind of a world are we living in? It makes no sense. I mean, that would be the equivalent of me saying, you know what, I'm not making enough money to pay my bills. I'm going to quit one of my jobs. I'm going to cancel that contract. We don't need it. It doesn't make sense. You've got to cut spending first, or you've got to, either the GDP of Iowa's got to increase to where you're going to come up with more revenues, or you're going to have to cut spending. What they're doing is they've not done either one. The GDP is not suddenly just going to go up. And a lot of these economic plans, we end up seeing the disasters they cause, whether it be in Kansas or elsewhere. So the idea that you're going to just cut taxes, and you know exactly, or at least what I think their plan is, they're going to campaign on this, and they're going to say, you know what, we need to raise the sales tax, the tax on the poorest islands. I think that's what they're going to say. You know, unfortunately, we don't have enough revenues. There's nothing going to be left of the emergency fund before too long. Let's go ahead and raise the sales tax. I think that's probably where we're headed. So I'm actually opposed to increasing the sales tax at all. I would like to see it eventually phased out. It's a tax on the poorest islands. And when you try to say, well, we're going to tax online sales, good luck with that. I mean, it's so easy right now to skip over and not pay those taxes. It's going to be pretty difficult to enforce. Oh yeah, we'll do that. Well, then you're going to have more government bureaucracy investigating people who are not paying taxes on the sales tax. That costs money. Taxes also, you know, on the poorest islands, a lot of things we say, well, we're just not going to tax necessities. A car's a necessity. People going to their first job, that is a necessity. Getting to work, the vehicle registration taxes they pay makes it difficult. A cell phone's a necessity now. So people shouldn't have, poor people shouldn't have smartphones, right? Well, of course they should. How else are they going to check their email to learn about the job they've applied for? How else are they going to call that job and do the phone interviews they have? So the idea that the poor don't pay taxes, you know, that gets pushed around a lot. But if you look at it statistically, they pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes than the wealthiest islands.
So would you keep the income tax, unlike Marco? So if you're phasing out sales tax, does that mean, just give me a sense of how overall a tax mix looks for you?
Yeah, I would like to see the sales tax phased out. Now, there's obviously, one is you have to pass something to the legislature. I don't think you're going to pass the income tax ever through a legislature or phasing it out.
I have to disagree with that, because I think we're the reason.
You think the Democrats right now, when they take over, are going to pass that?
The reason I ran is because I think the Republicans in Iowa, a strong majority of them, could get behind phasing out the income tax, and I think we can prove. We've been talking about this since the '60s, since Harold Hughes was governor, and
I think he raised the income tax, though.
I think we can prove, yes, but I think we can prove that we can phase out the income tax, lower property taxes, and lower sales taxes. We have to show, we can't just say, as much as we want to say taxation is theft and then talk on the internet. We run candidates that are going to prove how are we going to get revenue in the next 4 years, in the next 50, in the next 100. And another big one that just happened in the Supreme Court is allowing for states to decide about online betting, or sports betting, and for me, online poker is a big one. To me, getting revenue.
I want to get into that, but let Jake respond, because I'm interested in why you think that the legislature would be more willing to phase out the sales tax than they would the income tax.
I think once you talk to people and explain it to them, so you look at our border towns that suffer, for one. I live in Council Bluffs. Can you imagine if we eliminated the sales tax, how many people would come over and shop from Omaha? They already spend a lot of money at the casinos we have there, because they don't have that in Nebraska. They're all the time spending a lot of money. That grows our economy. That helps the state of Iowa. It helps Council Bluffs. It helps a lot of our border towns. A lot of them are rural areas where we can get small shops going in those areas. And it's also, you know, the sales tax is a tax on the poorest Iowans. We eliminate the need for as much government assistance also if we're not taxing people to death. And that's what we've done. Now, I would still allow, I want to be clear on something, because this is what a lot of people ask me about. I still think that the local community should have their own local option sales tax. If we did away with that, it would destroy some of these small towns. That's not what I'm talking about. But I do think there's a way that we can at least reduce and possibly phase out. So what you do is you cut government by a certain % every year, and then you reduce the taxes. That you don't do it all overnight. When you start to do massive changes to economic plans or taxation overnight, you end up with major problems. And you end up with budget shortfalls like we've got now, where you say, oh, we're going to give these tax credits out here. Oh, no, we're going to do property tax relief. And then, oh, we didn't realize that our revenues weren't going to be that much. One time you might understand it. When it happens every year like it is now, that becomes major problems. So when you look at things like this tax cut that's been proposed, I think maybe it's a way trying to win votes, but it's not based in any sort of reality.
Well, if this tax goes into effect without any economic growth, you know, we won't get to the $2.2 billion, but we will get up to $400 million a year. You know, can you identify if you're going to phase out taxes even more? You know, dealing with boards and commissions is great, and dealing with licensing, but you're going to have to cut a lot more than that.
Yeah, well, a lot of it goes too, if you look at the state of Iowa insurance contracts that we have through Blue Cross, right? They own a monopoly. That's a huge part of the budget right there of what we're paying for insurance on public employees, for example. That's one thing we should probably look at renegotiating those contracts. Or hopefully at some point it opens up to more competition where we've got more competition to choose from. Ultimately, whenever someone has a monopoly, the state of Iowa has to deal with, and we're going to lose. That's a big section of our budget. Another things that we can look at too is like prisons. Well, they're overpopulated now. In the next, like 2027, I think they're supposed to be at 142% capacity. That's something we don't have the funds right now to pay for. We don't have the funds to build more prisons. So what are we going to do? But if you look at what we could do if we stop prosecuting things like addiction issues, the prisons aren't equipped to deal with them anyway, or things like simple marijuana. If we stop prosecuting that and treating addiction like addiction, you largely take those issues away. It costs a little over $30,000, I think, right now to house a prisoner for a year. And that way you can also focus on bigger issues. But as far as the going through and phasing out stuff, you have to look at every department, everything in the budget, and you don't do it all overnight. That's the last thing you want to do.
The vast majority of the budget is K-12 education, Marco. How do you save money in K-12 education?
Yeah, I can definitely address that question, but I do want to add, it's kind of across the board, and when the state government gets involved across the board, can we increase revenue and actually bring in more money by getting the government out of some things. One big thing is, like I said, I want to allow for sports betting and online poker. I want to address maybe why is entitlement spending so high. If we move towards a freer market in healthcare, the opportunity for more Iowans to have cash for care, while still having a more focused safety net on people that are vulnerable, that need life-saving medications, that can't take care of a family member. I think we can actually make sure less people fall through the cracks while we're reducing entitlement spending. I think also looking at...
I'm sorry, how does that work? I'm not sure I follow that.
If we have sort of a comprehensive mandated insurance for all Iowans, a market where you have to choose between 2 or 3 companies, I think probably somewhere around 50 to 60% of Iowans don't necessarily need that kind of mandated micromanaged care across the board. They could opt to something more like catastrophe care. They have a huge medical bill, as opposed to going to the doctor for a checkup and getting this bill that they don't quite know exactly what they're going to pay because it's going through bureaucracy. Whereas if we actually pinpointed vulnerable Iowans, people that are now in these MCOs that aren't getting care, and actually focused on helping them as opposed to trying to help the whole of the population of Iowa, I think we would save a lot of money. In terms of entitlement spending, I think if we looked at maybe why do we have so many people that are on medication, why do we have so many people that are unhealthy, obese, is government involvement have something to do with that? Even in what we're having our markets, what we're eating, subsidies for high fructose corn syrup. You know, I think there's so many little things we can change to reduce entitlement spending, but to get back to education spending, I think I actually have a plan to give teachers a pay raise without raising taxes, and this is all about new revenue and saving money in other areas. Same with mental health reform.
How do you do that? How do you give teachers a raise without raising taxes?
You build it transparently into the budget, and you actually bring in revenue. You don't mental health reform, for example. Right now, if people have to call 911 or go through the court system instead of actually we spend money and address the root of the problem, I think that's another way you save government spending. But yes, I think it's all about bringing in more revenue before we make these drastic changes or drastic cuts. Like, prove that the government now has more money through more voluntary means than before, and then we can keep on this path of phasing out the income tax or tax reform.
New revenue, you're talking about sports betting,
Sports betting, online poker. I think by ending certificates of need, we have more competition, more facilities, more doctors, occupational reform, licensing reform, but also previously prohibited markets, hemp and cannabis. I think we can't understate how much potential revenue is there, and I think most Iowans would agree we can at least fill gaps in funding and balance budgets, focus on the things that majority of Iowans want: better education. Whether they disagree on whether that's homeschooling, charter, private schooling, or public education, we pretty much agree across the board that we're going the wrong way, that we want improved education.
If you're phasing out the income tax, the way you get revenue out of hemp and recreational marijuana is sales tax? Is that how you get license fees?
Excise tax specifically, but more just on the actual exchange of the good and service, as opposed to propping up one company to handle this. I think this is something where we can prove the free market can handle this, and we still get revenue as a state. Because if we get too involved, we just create a new black market. If somewhere, take some of the places that we can learn from places that have hemp and cannabis markets, and show, if you have a really high taxation and a lot of restrictions and control, you're just creating an incentive for drug dealers to exist again, as opposed to going to a pharmacy and getting this kind of good or service.
Does that plan work? And,
Well,
what would you do for education?
If you cut the income tax or completely eliminate, that's, I want to say, around $3.5 billion from the state's budget a year. I could be off on my math. I'd have to look at that again. I don't know that there was any way we could bring in that much. And you've got to get these things passed through the legislature first. So there's going to be lag time there. Even if they did pass that, I don't think you've got consensus on legalizing all this stuff right now. I don't know that it's. I don't think that the revenues would be there to replace that with online gambling and hemp and marijuana and whatever else. But that's something we can definitely look at. It certainly has helped other states. Now, you'd also talked about a little bit about education. Mm-hmm. Education, there's many factors to consider in education too. One thing I can recall, I graduated from Lineville-Clio High School, which is no longer there. One of them that forced consolidation 8-9 years ago. That one, I remember there was talk about, they voluntarily consolidated, I should say. There was talk about forced consolidation. That drives up costs as well. That's something we've also, when we look at our budgets, what we want to do to protect rural Iowa, that was something that I remember Tom Vilsack, when he was governor, mentioned, and I don't know how serious he was, but he had mentioned forcing, I think it was about 100 of the smallest schools to consolidate. And that was something that caused, major complications for the small communities, saying, how are we going to survive? Our towns are already dying. That's one thing to look at, and a lot of other things are tied into it. You can look at the budget, though. There's things like the Iowa Communications Network. I mean, we built a $1 billion telecommunications network back in the 1989, and now it does cost us quite a bit of money. We've got to, every few years, we've got to replace the wire there. We've got to upkeep this. It costs staff to have this. We could look at selling that, for example. It would save the state over $50 million a year, for example, out of the education budget, or gifting it to local communities or whatever. That's one thing. It doesn't directly go anymore into educating kids, and at one point it was pretty neat being able to get on the ICN to a teleconference with other schools. Now you have Skype. I teleconference with business all across the state. A lot of that stuff is being replaced now. That's just one example. There's also a lot of administration. I think we need to get back to it, looking at letting the local school districts dictate a lot of their policy, letting the local teachers teach what the local school boards want to teach. I don't think the people in the state legislature or the governor's office are smart enough to be able to do that. I've picked as my running mate retired public school teacher Lynn Gentry if I win the nomination. And part of it's that I do think education is very important. But I think there are definitely cuts that can be made strategically that don't impact the teachers' pay, that don't hurt rural communities. But if we look in there, there's a lot of things not really related to education, and a lot of things that have been put in there as pet projects over the years by members of the legislature.
If I may add to that, my team has a teacher too, actually a special education teacher at a Woodward Granger. It is an issue I'm really concerned with, and I have a child in public school, and we also we do want to address. I think if we address keeping teachers here, creating an environment where teachers want to teach here, then that does mean more local control, being able to actually address in your community, in your school, at least in your state, if we need to actually change standards. If we need to change our kind of our metrics and the path we're headed on. So definitely more, I think there's this fear of moving away from things like Common Core and No Child Left Behind, but to local control. But I really want to work to champion that these fears are unfounded. I mean, if you're in a community like Fairfield, Iowa, that is more liberal, that local control is going to be there for you, not just for what maybe the most extreme Republican has to say about education.
I haven't heard you guys mention school choice, which surprises me. I would think that would be the sort of part of the libertarian philosophy as well. Where do you come down on, especially when it comes to public subsidies for private schools?
To me, that's not a libertarian idea, because you're taking money from taxation, from revenue, and giving it to a private school. Is that any better than making that argument against a public school? I personally don't think so. I think it's still problematic from where how I view that kind of philosophy, that kind of idea.
So, yeah, as far as giving subsidies or voucher systems, I don't like it for that reason. But I would support tax credits, for example, particularly to homeschool parents. There's a lot of homeschool parents out there. Also, you've got to look at something else, though. A lot of our schools are rural. So the idea that you're going to have a lot of school choice, one thing we can do is make sure there's open enrollment between districts. The best schools will thrive if there's a struggling school and parents want to take their child out of that school. But I think the idea that there's going to be private schools replacing down there in some of these small communities where they've got, a couple hundred kids in the high school itself. I graduated with 8 people. So the idea that there would be a lot of competition there is, I don't think that's quite right. But there is options, and I think you can do it through tax credits, for example, to make sure people have the funds that they can to educate their own children if they decide to take them out of public schools.
I do agree with a lot of that. I also want to kind of change the tone of the conversation that we're pitting homeschooling versus private and charter schooling and public schooling. I think as long as we can show that the revenue is there, we can improve across the board, and I definitely think these are all viable options for Iowans, and I appreciate as a parent that we have all of those options in a majority of communities. I'd like to see, you know, that option in every community. But
we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to have you guys give closing arguments. So explain why you think the Des Moines Register should endorse you, Jake.
Well, I've ran for office before. I have a history of being able to work with the parties, get issues out there in front of people. I think my ideas are realistic. I think they could be implemented. I think we're going to move the debate in a direction that's going to be positive for all of Iowans. You know, there's a lot of things of keeping major party status as well. I think I'm the best candidate to do that. If the Libertarian Party keeps major party status after this this election, then we can run more candidates for office and really influence people even more. If you take a look at the way other parties other than the Democrats and Republicans have won, you know, obviously the Republicans did replace the Whig Party. That's always a possibility that we knock off one of the two major parties. But there's another way that we can. And if you look at the Socialist Party, they didn't necessarily even win a lot of elections, but they influenced policy quite a bit. Things like the New Deal, direct election of senators, the Prohibition Party. We all remember what they did. It was a disaster, but we had the Prohibition Party. And even someone like Ross Perot probably was the reason why the budget was balanced, because he continued to talk about that in the 90s. The Republicans and Democrats had to do something about it. A lot of issues that I can talk about that I'm afraid will be ignored that if I'm not up for talking about them.
Okay, Marco.
I think that that the Register should endorse me because I've been traveling. I've dedicated years now to traveling around the state and listening to different communities that are largely Republican in some places and that vote largely Democrat in other places. I do want to work with elected officials from both sides of the aisle and kind of champion this idea that we can work together to find solutions and kind of restore this idea that of governorship that we had with someone like Harold Hughes and Robert Ray, Democrat and Republican, but most people across the board, it wouldn't be this kind of a duel between the parties sort of thing in that kind of environment, and I kind of want to move away from that. We need to do some healing. I think that I have a very strong running mate, Farrika L. Robertson. She's a mother, grandmother, a small business owner, and she's been having a lot of challenging conversations in communities. And I think the fact that we kind of come together and agree on so many things was big, and I think we can do that with other politicians in the state. I also really want to champion mental health reform now, regardless of ism, regardless of policy. I want to address these people that are falling through the cracks from the crony Reynolds care that we have now that no one likes unless they're a supporter of Reynolds. I want to champion the nutrient reduction strategy, even if that means we have to agree that this needs to go against some people's idea of libertarian ideology. Those are huge things that we need to get done this cycle, and I want to champion those. And I want to show maybe concerned Democrats, concerned liberals, why we can phase out the income tax, and still we don't do that until we show we have revenue for education, for mental health, for, you know, and I also am championing criminal and civil justice reform. We've had debates on that. We've gotten deep into those issues, and I respect, you know, the hell out of Jake for coming out and debating and taking tough questions. You know, I want to point out that our governor has not shown up to these debates and forums, and we have every time. And even if it is a place that might be hostile to the stereotype of our ideas in our party, we're there having these conversations. And you know, I think just for that reason, I think I would be the best choice to keep moving these ideas to benefit all Iowans as opposed to, you know, one party.
Okay. Thank you, Jake Porter and Marco Battaglia, for being here today. Tune in again at 3 p.m. today for our interview with Democratic candidate for governor Cathy Glasson, the 5 other Democratic candidates for governor, and the 3 Democrats running in the contested primary for Iowa's 3rd congressional district have also been meeting with the Des Moines Register editors and staff You can see the videos from meetings that we have already had and watch for the schedule for upcoming meetings on DesMoinesRegister.com and tune in for all the coverage of the primary and the election. Thanks.